So obviously the biggest story this week is the attack in Brussels, or for true political wonks who only focus on that, there's obviously the primaries that just happened, but not going to dive into either of those stories today. Today I want to go back to something that used to be all over the news but now is kind of faded into the background. But should it? Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of the Motley Do Show, where we take some of the biggest stories in the news, rip it out of the echo chamber, and try to dive into what's really going on. Now, up until the past couple weeks, or maybe even the last month when the presidential campaign really got into full swing, we were talking about kids getting sick. Specifically the kids of Flint, Michigan, who are getting sick because of dangerously high levels of lead in their drinking water. In 2013, the American Society of Civil Engineers actually gave the grade of D to the entire country as a whole for the quality of its drinking water. And it just so happens that 2013 is the exact same year that Governor Rick Snyder and his administration in Michigan decided to switch the location of where Flint, Michigan got its drinking water from. Now before this, they had been getting their drinking water from Lake Huron, which is glacial water. That's glacial ice that melts and goes into Lake Huron, and then that feeds into Flint, Michigan. But at the time, there was a huge budget shortfall and they were trying to cut costs. And they found that one of the ways they could cut costs is no longer pay for the semi-expensive water coming out of Lake Huron, but actually pay for water to come from the Flint River, which had been thought of as a choice earlier on, but deemed unworthy and unsafe because of high levels of toxicity in the water. Now, it wasn't just the water coming out of the Flint River that made the kids sick. What actually happened was the water from the Flint River went into the lead pipes underneath the city that led to everybody's homes, and those pipes corroded because of the toxicity of the water. And when that happened, the lead came off the pipes and went into the children. And lead poisoning in small children can be deadly. And not only that, if they're not killed, it can actually cause huge problems, developmental problems, all sorts of things as they get older. Now, for anybody watching the news a couple months ago, this was everywhere. Famous documentary filmmaker Michael Moore was driving petition after petition to have Governor Rick Snyder resign, or actually have him recalled from office over this exact scandal. President Obama declared a national state of emergency for Flint, Michigan so that they could get funds to help actually fix the problem, which you might think the problem would be just switch back to the original water source, switch back to Lake Huron. But they had actually already done that. Governor Snyder did that back in 2015, which was exactly around the time the EPA was allowed to step in because they had gained enough evidence to say that this was happening. But again, Michigan had already switched back, so what could they do? Now one of the big options on the table is to actually replace all the pipes under the city, which is going to cost millions upon millions of dollars, which is where this emergency funds could actually come in handy. Now again, this is one of those cases where so many people would look at this and say, someone has to be to blame for this. Someone in the administration decided to make that choice to switch from Lake Huron to the Flint River purely for cost-saving purposes. This was purely a money decision. And while Michigan had actually cut so much other stuff from the budget already, and they were still giving tax breaks to companies, you would think maybe they could take it from there, but no, they decided to lower the quality of the drinking water for the kids in Flint. But that's beyond the point. People wanted answers. People wanted to know, did Snyder himself make this call, and did he know as early as mid-2014 that there was dangerous levels of lead in the water? And did they say nothing about it? Now, oddly enough, when they called Snyder in front of Congress to testify, they didn't just call him. At the same time, they called EPA Administrator Gina McCarthy. She's the woman who heads the Environmental Protection Agency, which is the agency that actually stepped into Flint to find out all the problems that were going on. Now, of course, the committee that was calling this hearing is run by the Republicans, and what happened was a frustratingly clear example of political kabuki theater. They were not looking for evidence. They were not looking for the facts. What they did was use the entire day to just attack Gina McCarthy and the EPA, saying it was her fault. It was the administration's fault. It was Obama's fault that the kids in Flint were sick. It couldn't possibly be the guy sitting next to her, Governor Snyder, whose administration made that choice to change the water. No, it was Gina McCarthy's fault, because she didn't rush into Michigan with the EPA and the power of the federal government much earlier and take over when the problem was already being seen. Now, Gina McCarthy responded to them by saying, you, Congress, wrote the law that says the states have the power. You all talk about how you want the power to go back to the states and away from the federal government. That's exactly the way it is now. The EPA is not allowed by law law to just jump into some state randomly about a problem they think they see. They have to gain tons and tons of evidence, and they have to present that evidence to the state. The state has to be given time to do it on their own, and then if then they haven't done it, the APA can move in. But again, by that time, Snyder had actually moved the water source back to Lake Huron. So in the end, this is a pure example of the contradiction of conservative beliefs. When you say that you want all the power to go back to the states, you can't then blame the federal government for not rushing in fast enough. And then, if you wanted more examples of how stupid and idiotic that this actual hearing was, let's look at Representative Earl Buddy Carter, Republican from Georgia, who when he was questioning Gina McCarthy, he first started off by asking her what the P stood for in EPA. Now, I don't know about you, but if you've ever watched one of these things, the most infuriating thing is when they try to treat each other like children. They patronize each other to try to demean the other person on the other end. They have no ability, it seems, to talk to each other like adults, which is what we would want as voters. But let me get back to the point. He asks her what the P stands for, and she says protection. And he goes, protection, really? That seems like something you failed at. You didn't protect the kids and the citizens of Flint, Michigan. Now, like I said, it wasn't allowed for the EPA to do that under state law, and when she reminded Representative Carter about this, he replied, the law? I don't think anyone here cares about the law. Let that sink in for a second. Now, if you actually want to watch him say that, I've linked to the original video down below. Now, for all those people who did see this in the news, it is sad that it's dropped out of the national conversation so much, because it is something that serves as an example of things that we should fight against. These are man-made crises that we should be able to fix well before they happen. But in this episode, what I want to talk about is not just the fact that Flint, Michigan has fallen out of the spotlight, but the fact that if we really want to talk about safe drinking water, if we really want to go into the fact that there are kids drinking water with dangerous levels of lead in it, Flint, Michigan wasn't even the tip of the iceberg. Flint, even at its worst, had lower levels of lead poisoning than a number of other cities and states. In a very forthright article from Kevin Drum over at Mother Jones, he listed out all these other places, like Allentown, Pennsylvania, 23.11%, Detroit, Michigan, 8%, Erie County, New York, 14%, Grand Rapids, Michigan, 9.2%, Illinois, 5.97%, Milwaukee County, Wisconsin, 10.7%, New Hampshire, 6.24%, New York, right outside of New York City, 6.67%, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, 8.32%, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, 10.19%, Richland County, Wisconsin, 12.4%, West Virginia, 5.28%, Wisconsin, 5.57%. Now, that wasn't even an exhaustive list. That was just where Kevin decided to stop because his hands were tired. The ones that I left out of Kevin's list that I want to make a special point about now are those home cities and states of presidential candidates we saw this year who did stand up on stage and talk about the scandal in Flint and how it should be dealt with, while not even mentioning the levels of lead in their own water. Atlantic City, New Jersey, state of former presidential candidate Chris Christie. Baltimore, Maryland, state of former presidential candidate Martin O'Malley. Louisiana, home of former candidate Bobby Jindal. Cleveland, Ohio, Toledo, Ohio, and then Ohio as a whole, all home for current presidential candidate John Kasich. Oh, and I forgot Salem County, New Jersey, also Chris Christie land. So the reason why I wanted to do the video on this topic is because I wanted to actually try to get this back into the national conversation, because the true outrage in Flint isn't just that it happened, it's because it happened purely for monetary reasons, and also that it was only a fraction of what is happening across the entire country, and nobody is dealing with it. Now, should Governor Snyder resign? Absolutely. And should the country sit down and pat ourselves on the back and think that we fixed the problem once he leaves? No. There's too many other cities, towns, and states that need to have this same problem rectified. There are too many kids and adults and elderly getting sick because of that drinking water. So it's time to widen the lens to the entire problem and not just focus on the latest occurrence of it. But that's my piece. Tell me, what do you guys think? How would you handle going after a national drinking water problem? Would you make it an infrastructure project and let the federal government do it? Or would you block grant money to each of the states to fix it themselves? Do you trust the states to do it at their level? Or do you think this is something that has to be done nationwide? Let me know in the comments down below. So thanks again for watching another episode of the Motley Stew Show. If you haven't subscribed yet, you can do so below. There's also some vlogs on this channel. I haven't gotten quite back into vlogging yet from taking my kind of extended hiatus, but they'll come in time. You can also like, share, and favorite this video. Send it out to anyone you think might want to join in the conversation. Stay tuned for next week, and as always, here's a little bit of the kids.
Whoa! You're so excited!
Daddy! Daddy!
Oh, here comes the other one.
Daddy.
Yes.
Come in the
Uh-huh.
A train passed in the fire truck, my fire truck.
The train passed your fire truck?
Yeah, it stopped.
It stopped.
And I went to you.
It went to me.
Yeah, no, I went to you.
You went to me. And if he goes up against Clinton or Sanders, they pick up even just 42, 43% of those states, he'll lose every one of them. And we've seen 49 states to 1 before, and it could happen again.